diesel side of it comes in, I'm a huge diesel advocate.
Yeah.
And most people hear the word diesel and they think, "Oh my gosh, black smoke! Oh, it's ruining the environment." But that's old diesels. All the newer diesels, even from the mid '90s, I mean, all of them are super clean burning. You get really good fuel economy. But I ran into a guy probably I would say it was 2004, 2003. I was right out of high school. So I graduated in 2003. So it was just out of high school. I moved up to a little hippie ranch, Greenfield, #Greenfield. Anyways, he ran his truck on biodiesel, which I thought was pretty cool. I asked him a bunch of questions, and it was the answer was, it's all it is vegetable oil. It's just been converted, like you strip the glycerin out of it, which the glycerin is like the thick part of the oil. Mm-hmm. So you're pretty much thinning the oil out. You're stripping this product out of it. Anyways, and you can run it in diesel vehicles. Any diesel vehicles, tractors, cars, trucks, you name it. And I thought that was awesome. So I kind of did a little research. This is before the internet, or before I had the internet, way before smartphones. I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. You can actually run a combustion engine on something that a farmer grew and harvested and then pressed the oil out of. You could run an engine off that. That's awesome. And I already had like a background in all throughout high school, I took ag classes and stuff like that. So I was like really into agriculture at the time, and all the way up to now. So after high school, I had heard about the oil thing, and I thought, oh, that'd be great if you can grow your own oil crops. Canola oil, people call it rapeseed, but it's canola oil. Even olive oil, you name it. Anything that produces oil, you could press into, or if it produces oil, any form, like even 1%, you can get that 1% out of there, or a partial of it, and turn it into fuel. Anyways, so after me and my wife Sarah got married, I think we were married at the time. Yeah, I bought a 1987 Mercedes-Benz 300 SDL, hoopty ride, 4-door sedan. It had a straight 6 turbo diesel. It was a 3-liter. Anyways, it was gangster. But I started messing around with vegetable oil. And first I started making biodiesel. We bought it was actually my wife's parents at the time. Well, my wife's mom and her stepdad at the time bought a biodiesel kit thing that I put together for me. It was like a processor, they call it, and where I could take raw vegetable oil, put it in the thing, and I add it was lye or they call it a catalyst, and methanol, which is a high alcohol. It's a racing alcohol you could buy. I bought it in Chico by the barrel, but you titrate the oil. Whatever the titrate says, that's what your catalyst. You have to add your catalyst to it. You're already using a certain amount of methanol per gallon of oil, so that's easy. And then when you titrate the oil, that's how much catalyst you add. Anyways, figured that out. Funny thing is, my neighbor at the time was already making it. He'd been making it for years, and I never had met my neighbor when we first moved there. Well, finally, the way I met him was I was driving by his shop one day, and his shop door was open, and I saw what looked exactly like the same biodiesel processor I had. And so I pulled in there to talk to him one day, and he's like, "Yeah, I've been making biodiesel for years. It's a no-brainer," because he ran tractors and trucks and stuff like that. But anyways, so I started, after I learned about the biodiesel thing, I started collecting oil. I made my own vacuum tank, which you can go up to a barrel and it'll suck a barrel of oil, which a barrel is 55 gallons. It'll suck a barrel dry in less than a minute. And it goes into the tank, and then I can take it home and process it, do further processing on it. and learned how to do biodiesel. Found out because biodiesel at the time, this was early 2000s or mid 2000s, maybe even later 2000s, but the cost to make biodiesel was $1 a gallon to make a gallon of usable diesel, clean diesel. And that was back when diesel fuel, like petroleum diesel, was, I believe it was like $1.75, maybe $2, somewhere around there. Thank you, George Bush. Anyway, so I figured, okay, this cost me $1 a gallon. Well, when diesel rose to like almost $5 a gallon, this was in somewhere, it had to have been somewhere around 2009, I want to say, maybe 2010. It rose, don't quote me on that, but it rose somewhere around $5 a gallon. Well, everybody's like, oh my gosh, $5 a gallon, blah, blah, blah. And I thought that was great that I was only paying $1 a gallon for diesel. Well, come to find out, you could take just straight vegetable oil, filter it down, and if you could, especially in the wintertime, if you could get it to a certain temperature, your diesel engine will inject it and it'll burn it better than diesel fuel, petroleum diesel. So I kind of just dropped the biodiesel thing because it was costing me $1 a gallon to do that. Even though I was saving a lot of stuff, or saving a lot of money, but it also took like 2 to 3 days to make 40 gallons, which was, at the time, I had a 01 Dodge. This was after the Mercedes. I had a 01 Dodge diesel, and it had like a 34 gallon tank or something. So it would take me about 2 to 3 days to actually make a tank of fuel to fill it up. Either way, I was like, $1 a gallon that just sounds too expensive, even though diesel was $5 a gallon. So I started researching just straight vegetable oil and came across a couple companies at the time. I want to say one of them was called Grease Monkey. I believe they're still in business. They were in San Francisco. They were making in the tank where you could just use the stock tank of your diesel vehicle and add this little heater to it to where you could just run it, fill it up with vegetable oil, filtered vegetable oil, and run it straight. And these people, all their testimonies were like, oh my gosh, I get, 5 miles more per gallon. I get more horsepower. And it smells like, somebody's cooking French fries when you're behind them. And I thought, oh, dude, this is even better. So because I was already collecting the vegetable oil at the time. I just didn't have to buy methanol and the catalyst. And at the time I was using potassium nitrate. And then every once in a while I get some sodium nitrate. But either way, so I thought it was cool. So I started doing that. So I kind of retired the biodiesel processor, and I didn't have to deal with the glycerin, which was the byproduct of making biodiesel. It was this black liquidy, like thick liquid. You really couldn't do anything with it. They didn't want it in the landfills. Some people said, oh, you could use it as a fertilizer. I tried that. You couldn't get rid of it because you could only use it so much when you mix it with water as a fertilizer. And when you're making 40 gallons, every couple of weeks, you're ending up with like 10 gallons of glycerin. Well, you can't go through that much glycerin as a fertilizer unless you had hundreds of acres of fields to spread it on. And so I just said, screw it. I'm not going to even do this anymore. I'm just going to go straight vegetable oil. I learned how to filter it properly. You filter it down to 1 micron. And with the Dodge diesel I bought my neighbor, actually the other guy that made biodiesel, him and his wife had it was a 90 gallon, I think it's 90 gallon. It's an auxiliary tank, so you could put it in the back, the bed of your truck all the way up to the cab, and it held 90 gallons of whatever you wanted it to hold, diesel or whatever. And it had a little toolbox on top, and I was like, this is perfect. So I worked it off. I did some work around there. We just traded work for it. So I worked that off, got that, and then another buddy of mine had a welding company, and he did stainless welding. So I bought all the pipes and stuff like that. Had him weld up the heat exchangers for it. I used zip ties, everything, whatever I can, wire, zip tied everything up underneath the truck to where you couldn't see it, and ran, fuel lines that would accept vegetable oil running through it without it eating it up or anything, and experimented with it, and it worked. And I mean, me and my wife put, I don't even know how many miles on that thing, back and forth to Chico, Redding. We go over to my parents, grandma's, whatever. I mean, we put tens of thousands of miles on it on straight 100% vegetable oil, which some people will say, oh, it's free fuel. It's not exactly free because you got to buy the filters to filter the fuel, and the electricity to pump it. But it was, I think I calculated like 12 cents a gallon to make that stuff. And even to this day, I'm still collecting vegetable oil, small amounts. Don't get on me, Highway Patrol. just small amounts, and I filter it. I blend it with diesel fuel for my tractor because I have an old tractor. It's a 79 Allis Chalmers. I just blend it in it like 75% vegetable oil to 25% diesel, and it runs better than it ever has. It smells great, and I get more horsepower out of it. And I'm paying 75% less for fuel. So
there you go.
That's my rant on vegetable oil.
Yeah.
The renewable resources.
What's really interesting, so while you were talking about that, I had a thought about something, because I drive a diesel car. Sure. You've got a couple diesel trucks and your tractor.
Yeah.
Your wife has a diesel SUV. Yeah. Somebody else I know has
Volkswagen TDIs, baby.
Yep. Somebody else I know has the previous generation of the Jetta TDI that I have.
Yep. Minus the emissions, probably.
Yeah. So
screw deaf.
This is kind of like this is kind of my own personal conspiracy theory, but I always found it so interesting that, these Volkswagen TDIs getting quite popular, and they're nice cars.
Yeah.
There's like...
they look good.
I think the mine and your wife's are the third generation of TDIs.
And you have a Jetta, she has a Touareg, and I think, what are yours is a 15? 2015?
Yeah, 2015, yeah.
Yours is a 2014, yeah.
Yeah,
that was the part of the diesel gate, they called it.
Yeah. So both of us have third generation TDIs. Yeah. So that they've been manufacturing these for a while.
Sure.
They're quite popular in Europe, and they had been getting more popular in the United States.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, Volkswagen does the stupidest thing.
Yep.
A car manufacturer could possibly do.
Sure.
They put a defeat device on their TDIs.
Yeah.
So that it would test within EPA
standards,
within EPA standards when it was on the bench, but then when it was out on the road.
Which is pretty gangster for them.
I know, right?
It got the vehicles in the country. That's all that matters.
Yeah. I mean, but it was funny that was the third generation of diesel vehicles that they had already been selling.
Yeah. What did the first ones have? I mean, were they?
Yeah. So the first ones didn't have any scandal like that.
Yeah. So what did they do different?
So so in these third generation, they wanted to, because the emissions laws in Europe are very different. I mean, they're not gonna be different anymore, given the trajectory of certain things like ultra low emission zones,
the diesel fuel and all that too is
the
different too.
The ULEZ or whatever laws that they're passing in major cities in Europe now. So it's
like a particulate matter kind of thing.
So it's not going to be different. It's not going to be different for much longer, but for a long time, the emissions laws in Europe were a lot less restrictive.
Yeah.
So they could get away with a lot more. And from my understanding, the third generation TDI design was quite a great design. Sure. It ran clean. Mm-hmm. It had great gas mileage, and they were pretty zippy for such, small motored vehicles.
You throw a turbo on anything, man, it goes fast.
And
might take 3 seconds to get there, but
I guess they really, really wanted the U.S. market to experience that.
yeah.
Because they just straight up ported them over to the U.S. and put on a little doohickey that made it test properly while connected to a computer.
Yeah. And our guys were smarter than that, I guess.
So, yeah, it's really... But, I mean, you think about it now, and it's like, that's the stupidest thing a large company like that could do. Because Volkswagen is a huge company.
Yeah, maybe they didn't pay the right person off.
They don't own... They don't just make Volkswagen. They own, like, Audi and a couple other brands.
Yep.
And then they...
well, they make tractors, too, I think. Because where my wife's car was made, it was made in, I want to say Slovakia. And it's Volkswagen Ag. So it's actually like a tractor company that makes certain models, I guess.
That would make sense.
Yours was probably made in Germany. Yours
no, mine is made in Mexico.
Oh, Mexico, yeah.
But
sorry, Mexico. No, I'm just kidding.
Sorry, but so not only are they kind of like a brand umbrella, but they're also, from what I understand, from what the dealer told me when I was buying the car, they're like the world's largest car bank. So they're actually a bank, and they themselves provide car loans for people wanting to buy Volkswagens instead of the normal process is you go to a dealer and the dealer, gets some banks on the phone financing. And says, who wants to finance this?
Yeah.
With Volkswagen, if you're buying a Volkswagen, the dealer just gets Volkswagen finance division on the phone.
They
and
call it Volkswagen Care.
And Volkswagen finances the car purchase themselves. So they're quite a large company. So for them to do something like that is incredibly stupid.
It's almost a conspiracy.
I know, and short-sighted. And the reason why I call it my own personal conspiracy theory is because after that happened, the market for diesel cars in the U.S. vanished.
Yeah. Well, and they started like demonizing diesels, because there was the whole clean diesel thing. And then all of a sudden Dieselgate happens with Volkswagen. And then everybody's like, all the diesels are bad. Blah. And then like in California, and other states too, they're trying to push, get rid of all the diesels and blah, blah, blah. Even though all these newer diesels actually burn cleaner, and because you're getting more fuel economy out of a gallon of this fuel. So instead of a gallon of gasoline where you can only get, anywhere from 15 to maybe 25, maybe 30 on some of those Hondas and Toyotas and stuff like that. All my diesel trucks, I get 25 miles to the gallon, no matter if I'm putting around town or if I'm on the freeway, because the way a diesel engine runs, it's just, there's no spark plugs or anything. It's just like injecting the same amount of fuel at this, every single time the piston comes up, you're injecting the same amount of fuel. It's just when you hit the throttle, if you're trying to go faster, your pistons are just moving faster. So you're still injecting the same amount of fuel. It's just faster, rotations, whatever. Unlike a gas car, you hit the gas, it just dumps fuel into your cylinder. But that's a different story. Anyways, but these diesel, even my diesel trucks, they get better fuel economy than most of these. Even a mid-sized car does. A car from the 90s all the way up till even now. There's still some of the like Nissan Pathfinders and stuff like that. Some of these, they're not necessarily SUVs, but they're like a crossover kind of thing. They're getting like 15 miles of the gallon on gasoline. And I have a full-size truck, long bed, 4-door Cummins diesel, and it's getting 25 miles of the gallon on diesel fuel with no modifications or anything. I mean, let alone if I could burn vegetable oil in there, I would be getting, if not the same fuel economy, a little bit more. I'd be pulling a little more horsepower out of that, which I can go into that now, is like diesel fuel has a cetane rating. Like a gasoline has octane, diesel has cetane. Well, most diesel, has a pretty low cetane level in it, which means the cetane is when it injects it into the cylinder and the piston's coming up to compress it, it actually ignites prematurely. When vegetable oil, the cetane level is like twice as high. It actually combusts at the right proper timing because the diesel engines were created around oil. Rudolf Diesel, who created or invented the diesel engine, actually, they didn't even have petroleum diesel fuel at the time of when he was inventing that. He invented it to run on peanut oil. He had a exhibition in the World's Fair, and it ran on the diesel engine ran on peanut oil. It was a single cylinder, huge diesel engine, but that was like his exhibition. Like, hey, this thing. Back then they were running steam engines and stuff like that. And he was like, this thing could replace a steam engine, one cylinder. The cylinder was as big around as a sofa, but it could replace a steam engine where you had to build a fire with coal or wood or whatever and keep adding water to it consistently. And this thing, you could just, it just sipped fuel, which the fuel at the time was oil, was from peanut oil. And, his thing was like, hey, a farmer can have a 1 or 2 or 3 diesel engines on his farm. We're talking farms that are, 1,000 acres. They can have, 1, 2, 3 engines to run on diesel. They could run, or they could plant a certain amount of acreage. Say out of 1,000 acres, you planted 100 acres of a canola oil or even corn. You can get oil out of corn, soybeans, you name it. You could take 1/10 of the acreage on your farm and grow it specifically for an oil crop. You can harvest that crop. You could press the oil out of it, which is just running it through an oil press. Nothing. It's just a rudimentary machine. And get this oil. So the farmer could grow his own oil. You could run it in the diesel engine and not ever have to pay. Because back then, even when the diesel engine was first invented, they still had kerosene. So you could run kerosene in it, but it wasn't a viable option back then because it was so expensive. And that was Rudolf Diesel's his kind of pitch to sell the diesel, which it kind of was a slow. It kind of took off slow, but after he started selling those, well, the petroleum industry, which back then it was Standard Oil, they kind of caught on and said, hey, you know what? When we're running this black sludge that we're pumping out of the ground, we're distilling this. We're getting gasoline, kerosene, and then like propane they were burning off. Diesel, I think they were either blending it back with kerosene or they were burning it off. It was a waste product. And then they'd get all their heavier oils and tars and stuff like that. Well, they said, hey, you know what? When we're running our fraction stills, because those stills they have to distill the petroleum, it was a fractional still, so it took off fractions. So if you could picture a cylinder that goes straight up, say every 10 feet had a different fraction. So the very, very farthest fraction would be like propane, which they were burning that off. It just went in. They just burned it. It went into the atmosphere. The methane, the whatever it is,
Propane?
When they burn it, it's carbon monoxide.
Oh, okay.
It would just go in the atmosphere. And then the next one down, it'd be gasoline. And then all the other stuff below that gasoline was like kerosene. They were just blending it all together. And they were selling it for like, lamp oil, stuff like that. And then anything below that fraction would have been like, motor oil, tar, like for roads and stuff like that, creosote, whatever, all the heavier oils. But Standard Oil, they figured, oh, hey, we could actually fraction off of the kerosene fraction. We could fraction something else off of that because they were getting more gallons per batch of this other fraction. It was a really thin, like almost watery thin off of kerosene. And they're like, you know what? We could run this in that Rudolf Diesel's new engine. And so they experimented with it and they went, oh, it actually works. but it never, ever since then, it never really went anywhere. Like they kept it the same way. And that's why you hear diesels down the road, they're clanking and, and what that is premature combustion in the chamber. You'll hear like old Ford 7.3s and stuff. They're going clank, 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 clank. Well, either way, Rudolph Diesel invented that engine to run on vegetable oil. So if you take even an engine to this day, a new engine, like these Volkswagens we have, and you put clean vegetable oil through them, the engine will quiet down. Like it'll almost be like a slight purr. It'll just be like a kitten purring instead of clanking. And you get more fuel economy and more horsepower out of it, and the emissions are cleaner because the diesel fuel from petroleum, it actually emits, like, I can't even name how many different chemicals that you're actually combusting. So they're burning. You're emitting things that, for one, you shouldn't be breathing, but some of that stuff doesn't even. There is no, you don't even register on a smog test, because it's just super minute amounts of certain things that were in it, and they have taken a lot of that sulfur out, so you're not breathing sulfur. But the vegetable oil, when you burn that, it's a higher amount of nitrous oxide, which who doesn't like that? But you're getting none of the other stuff that's coming out of it because it's not a petroleum product. It's literally just a pure, they call them esters. It's a pure ester from oil that you grow it every year. So if you grew a crop, 100 acres of soybeans this year, 100 acres would produce however many thousands of gallons of fuel, and you would run that on your farm, or if you had extra, you'd sell it to the neighbors, whatever. But you're not just, the plants that you grew, that you harvested, already sequestered all the carbon that they could out of the atmosphere. And then you're burning just the oils that those plants produce, unlike pumping, something out of the ground that's been down there for who knows how long. And you're burning that, putting all that in the atmosphere, but there's nothing that's actually what's the word? You're not pulling that carbon back out of the atmosphere like you would if you grew the crop for the oil. Either way, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's my oil rant.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, for sure. That's all I can say to that. That does remind me, though, of one of my other favorite conspiracy theories is, you ever hear about synthetic gasoline?
Synthetic gasoline? I don't think so.
So they can manufacture synthetic gasoline. And that part's not a conspiracy theory.
Like not ethanol, but you're talking actually gasoline.
They can manufacture a synthetic analog for gasoline.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's chemically identical to gasoline. I haven't looked into it. But from my understanding, they can manufacture a synthetic alternative to gasoline.
But it's not petroleum.
The
closest thing I've ever heard of was ethanol, which is, it is a crop you can grow, like corn or switchgrass or whatever, and they use certain yeast to produce it, and it's not the type of ethanol you want to drink.
Yeah.
It's a high alcohol that they distill. It works great for fuel. However, I'm a huge advocate for not using ethanol because I use a lot of small engines, chainsaws, weed eaters, stuff like that, just on our farm. And what happens is because here in California, they add, I believe it's 10% ethanol to our gasoline. And sometimes I think they add more, but they just don't tell you. But sometimes if you run a tank of regular gasoline, like say it's just I always run 91 octane through my small equipment. But say you run a gallon of 91 through your chainsaws or something, and you don't run it all the way out. You leave some of them in it, or some gas in there. Say it sits during the winter. Well, during the winter, it gets humid and it rains and, blah, blah, blah. it seems like that ethanol absorbs because it is they call it hydroscopic, something like that. It actually absorbs moisture like water, and then say in the spring I go to use my chainsaw again, it might run for a little bit, and then all of a sudden it just like the carburetor's clogged up. And I'm like, what the heck? Well, every time I've ever took a carburetor apart, there's like a tiny little screens in there, and it always has rust on it, or like almost like a gelatinous, something that's clogged that little thing. I'm like, what the heck is this? And my conspiracy is that, using that ethanol, it's all great because you can grow the crop, you can burn it, blah, blah, blah. But if you're running it in small engines with carburetors, because fuel injection, that's a different story. But carburetors don't like any little bits of water or anything in it. And so I think this ethanol has been, because I've gone through lots of carburetors in the last 20 years whenever they started putting ethanol in fuel. And it's always like every single year almost. I'm like, what is going on here?
I think I've heard that before.